The stakes here aren't just about a headline or a political win. We're looking at a fundamental, possibly irreversible shift in how American war-making works. We've crossed a line where the rule of law is being treated as a suggestion, and the Senate's reaction is the first real sign of a systemic immune response. This isn't theater, it's a constitutional cardiac arrest. So let's just sit with this for a second, because the speed of the last 48 hours is designed to make you blink and miss the mechanics of what's actually happening. While everyone was watching the grainy footage of the Maduro snatch and grab in Caracas and arguing about whether he deserved it, which, let's be honest, the guy's a monster, something much more dangerous was being etched into the fabric of our democracy. The president didn't just order a strike, he didn't just capture a foreign head of state, he effectively bypassed every single check and balance left in the building to do it. And now, finally, the Senate is waking up from its fever dream. We're looking at SJRES 90. If you haven't heard that number yet, memorize it. It's a bipartisan joint resolution to invoke the War Powers Act, and it's being led by a coalition that, quite frankly, shouldn't exist in today's climate. You've got Tim Kaine and Rand Paul, two guys who usually can't agree what time of day it is, standing on the same patch of dirt because they realize that if this operation stands unchallenged, the President of the United States has officially become an imperial executive. Think about the precedent. The White House isn't even calling this a war. They're using this surgical, legalistic terminology, calling it a non-international armed conflict against narco-terrorists. It's brilliant in a terrifying way. By labeling a sovereign government as a narco-cartel, they think they found a loophole in the Constitution that's big enough to fly a fleet of F-35s through. But here's where the GOP revolt part actually matters. This isn't just Democrats complaining from the sidelines. This is a fracture. When you see senators like Murkowski and Paul breaking ranks, they aren't doing it because they love Maduro. They're doing it because they know that once you hand a president the power to start a war under the guise of self-defense against fentanyl, you can never, ever take that power back. The administration's defense is that they're protecting Americans from drug-related deaths, and they're using that human tragedy as a legal shield to justify a regime change that Congress never voted on. It is a total forensic deconstruction of Article 1 power. If the Senate doesn't pass SJRS 90, the War Powers Act is effectively a dead letter. It's over. The great American experiment in shared war powers becomes a historical footnote. We are watching a MAGA Civil War, not over tweets or rallies, but over the very core of what it means to be a republic. They're calling it a decisive move, but when you strip away the flags and the Truth Social posts, what you're left with is a unilateral invasion. This isn't just about Venezuela. It's about whether the person sitting in the Oval Office is a president or a king. The Senate floor is about to become a crime scene for the Constitution. And if we don't pay attention to the boring legislative maneuvers happening right now, we're going to wake up in a country where the only person who decides who we kill and where we die is one man. Let's look at the receipts, because when a government starts making moves like this, they don't do it with a shout. They do it with a footnote. They bury the lead in a 50-page legal memo and hope you're too busy celebrating or mourning to read the fine print. But we're going to read it, every single line. We have to start with the actual anatomy of SJR 90. This isn't just a protest resolution. It's a surgical strike at the president's legal authority. If you pull the text, and you should, look at Section 1, Finding 1. It doesn't mince words. It quotes Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution. It's a reminder to the White House that Congress has the sole power to declare war. It sounds basic. It sounds like high school civics. But in 2026, stating that out loud is apparently a radical act of rebellion. Then you get to the meat of it in Section 2. This is the termination order. It directs the president to remove U.S. forces from hostilities within or against Venezuela unless there's a formal declaration of war or a specific authorization for use of military force within 60 days. 60 days. That's the clock. That's the fuse. And the reason this is a GOP revolt isn't just because Tim Kaine put his name on it. It's because Senator Rand Paul was an original co-sponsor on October 16, 2025. This has been simmering for months, and the administration knew it. They knew the Senate was already nervous about the naval boat strikes back in December, but they pushed ahead anyway. Now, let's talk about the Rubio Doctrine. That's what the wonks are calling it, the legal justification coming out of the State Department. This is where it gets forensic. The administration is essentially arguing that they don't need an AUMF because they aren't fighting a state, they're fighting a criminal enterprise. They've designated the Maduro government and its associated groups as narco-terrorists. By using that specific label, they're trying to move the entire operation out of the realm of war and into the realm of international law enforcement. It's a shell game. If it's law enforcement, they claim they have the authority under the Narcotics Control Act and the President's Article 2 powers to protect the nation from imminent threats, namely the fentanyl crisis. They are literally arguing that the drugs crossing the border constitute an armed attack on the United States. Think about that. If a drug shipment is an armed attack, then the president can strike any country on Earth at any time without ever asking for a vote. It is a loophole so large you could sail an aircraft carrier through it. And they are. The receipts on the Senate floor tell an even uglier story. Back on November 6th, Kaine and Paul tried to force a vote to discharge this resolution. It failed, 49 to 51. Just 2 votes. The Republican establishment, led by Thune, held the line. They said the resolution was premature. They said the president was just doing routine patrols. Well, fast forward to January 3rd, routine patrols just turned into a multi-front military operation in a sovereign capital. The math has changed. The sensational angle everyone is talking about, the Civil War, is real because of people like Senator Lisa Murkowski and Senator Susan Collins. They aren't libertarians like Paul, but they are institutionalists. They see the precedent being set. If the president can kidnap a head of state on a Saturday morning and tell Congress to deal with it on Monday, then the Senate is no longer a co-equal branch of government. It's a cheering section. And let's look at the forensic details of the operation itself. The White House is calling it a snatch and grab, but the reports coming out, the ones the administration is trying to classify, talk about 80 casualties. 80. That's not a police raid. That's a battle. When you have 80 people dead in the streets of Caracas, you are in a state of hostilities. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, specifically Section 4A, the president is required to report these hostilities to Congress within 48 hours. The president's report? It was a tweet, I'm not kidding, a series of posts claiming mission accomplished and justice served. No formal notification, no legal brief, just a victory lap. That is why SJRES 90 is the most important document in Washington right now. It is the last line of defense against a presidency that has decided the law is whatever they say it is. The resolution uses the expedited procedures of Section 601B of the International Security Assistance and Arms Export Control Act of 1976. That is the fast track. It means the leadership cannot block this. They cannot hide it in a committee. There will be a vote. Every Republican senator is being forced to choose. Do you stand with the America First base that wants Maduro's head on a plate, or do you stand with the Constitution that says you, and only you, have the power to send this country to war? The technicality of the Narco-Terrorist designation is the administration's shield, but SJRES 90 is the spear. It strips away the euphemisms. It doesn't care if you call them a cartel or a government. If you're using the U.S. military to conduct ground strikes in a foreign country, it's war, period. We're watching the forensic deconstruction of the American system in real time. The administration is betting that the public's hatred of Maduro will outweigh their love for the law. They're betting that the MAGA grip on the party is strong enough to silence the constitutionalists. But with 49 votes already in the bag before the invasion even started, the administration might have just overplayed their hand.
They thought they were capturing a dictator. They might have just triggered a revolution in their own party. This isn't an accident. It's not a snap decision made by a president who got too excited after a briefing, and anyone telling you that is either lying or hasn't been paying attention for the last 50 years. What we're seeing in Venezuela, this sudden unilateral snatch and grab, is the final move in a very long, very deliberate game. It is a feature of the system, not a bug.
To understand why SJS 90 is currently the most dangerous piece of paper in DC, you have to zoom out. You have to look at the pattern. We are living through the logical conclusion of a 50-year project to strip Congress of its most fundamental power, the power to decide who we kill. It started in 1973. The War Powers Resolution was supposed to be the never again to Vietnam. It was meant to be the leash that finally reined in the Imperial Presidency after Nixon's secret bombings of Cambodia. But look at the receipts. Every single president since Nixon, Democrat and Republican, has treated that law like a polite suggestion. They don't act pursuant to it, they act consistent with it. That's lawyer speak for, I'm doing what I want, but I'll send you a memo so you don't feel left out. But the Trump 2.0 innovation, that's where the pattern becomes a strategy. They didn't just ignore the War Powers Act, they found a way to render it irrelevant. The administration spent all of 2025 laying the groundwork for this. It wasn't just about Venezuela, it was about the Narco-Terrorist designation. By labeling the Maduro government and the Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization, they effectively moved the goalposts. They didn't need a new authorization for use of military force because they're claiming authority under the 2001 AUMF, the one passed after 9/11. Think about that. We are using a 25-year-old law meant for Al-Qaeda to justify a ground invasion of South America in 2026. This is the executive creep. It's the process where defending national interests becomes a catch-all for whatever the president wants to do. In 2025 alone, look at the timeline. In June, we had Presidential Proclamation 10949, the extreme vetting order that effectively militarized the travel ban. Then in September, the creation of the state sponsor of wrongful detention designation. Then the naval boat strikes in December. Every single one of these was a test. They were testing the Senate. They were testing the public. They were seeing how far they could stretch the Article 2 rubber band before it snapped.
And for most of 2025, Congress just sat there. They acquiesced. They let the Department of War, remember when they renamed the DOD, take the lead. But SJRES 90 is different because it's the first time the internal logic of the GOP has fractured. For years, the party was held together by a don't ask, don't tell policy regarding executive power. As long as the president was winning, nobody cared about the process. But when you start launching strikes on a sovereign capital without a briefing, when you start capturing foreign leaders like it's a reality TV show, the constitutionalist wing of the party starts to see the writing on the wall. They realize that if they let this stand, Senator Rand Paul and Senator Tim Kaine are no longer lawmakers, they're just observers. This is a 50-year strategy of legislative atrophy. Congress has spent decades delegating its power to the executive branch because war is hard, war is controversial, and war is bad for re-election. They wanted the president to take the heat so they could complain from the sidelines if things went south. But they didn't realize that power, once given away, is never voluntarily returned. The administration's defense is brilliant forensic theater. They aren't starting a war, they're ending a fentanyl invasion. They've turned a public health crisis into a tactical justification for regime change. It's the same pattern we saw in 2003 with WMDs, just updated for the 2026 news cycle. If SJRES 90 fails this week, we aren't just letting one operation slide, we are codifying the Rubio Doctrine. We are saying that the president can declare any group on Earth a terrorist organization and then use the full weight of the U.S. military to dismantle them. No vote needed, no debate needed, no accountability possible. The pattern is clear. This isn't about Maduro. It's about whether we still have a three-branch government or just one very powerful office with a massive military budget. The Senate isn't rebelling against Trump. They're rebelling against the realization that they've become obsolete.
So here is where the air gets thin. This is the part where we stop talking about legislative maneuvers and GOP fractures, and we start talking about what happens to the soul of a country when it decides that laws are just suggestions for people who aren't powerful enough to ignore them. Over the last 48 hours, the mask didn't just slip, it was torn off. While the Senate was scrambling to get the text of SJRES 90 onto the floor, the president was standing at a podium in Florida, telling the world, with a straight face, that the United States is now running Venezuela. Not helping, not partnering with, running. He's talking about taking the oil infrastructure to reimburse us for an invasion nobody asked for. He's talking about bringing in U.S. oil companies to fix the country, while Maduro sits in handcuffs on a Navy ship. And if that wasn't enough to make your blood run cold, he's already looking at the map for the next target. Colombia, he called it sick. Greenland, he's back to saying we need it for defense. This is the endgame. This is the moment where the America First anti-interventionist brand, the one that promised to end endless wars, officially died and was replaced by something much older and much darker. We aren't just policing the world anymore, we are liquidating it. If SJRES 90 fails, if the Senate can't find those 2 extra votes to trigger the War Powers Act and force a withdrawal, then we have effectively legalized piracy as a matter of state policy. Think about the stakes. We are telling every future president that as long as they can find a bad guy to kidnap and a resource to seize, they don't need a declaration of war. They don't need a briefing for the Gang of Eight. They don't even need to tell the American people until the boots are already on the ground.
The administration is betting on your exhaustion. They're betting that because Maduro was a dictator, you won't care that the Constitution was murdered to get to him. They're betting that because fentanyl is a tragedy, you'll accept a non-international armed conflict as a permanent state of being. But here's the thing about emergency powers. They never, ever go away once the emergency ends. Look at what's happening right now in the Senate cloakrooms. You've got people like Thune and Graham trying to backpedal from the president's claim that we're going to run the country. They're trying to pretend this is still just a counter-narcotics operation. They're trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. But you can't. The president already said the quiet part out loud. He's not interested in counter-narcotics. He's interested in absolute resolve. And that name, Operation Absolute Resolve, it tells you everything you need to know. It's not restoring democracy, it's not enduring freedom, it's about the resolve of one man to do whatever he wants because he knows the system is too broken to stop him. The next 60 days are the most critical period in our lifetime. That's the fuse. Under the War Powers Act, that's how long the president has before he must get congressional approval or pull out. But look at the rhetoric. He's already saying he doesn't mind boots on the ground. He's already threatening the president of Colombia. He's already treating the Caribbean like a private lake. If the Senate blinks, if they let the narco-terrorist loophole stand, then the 119th Congress will be the one that officially handed the keys to the kingdom over to the executive branch. We are standing at the edge of a cliff. On one side is a republic that, however flawed, still believes in the shared power of the people through their representatives. On the other side is a new normal where the president is the commander-in-chief of the country, not just the military.
And let's be real, if we don't demand clarity right now, if we don't force every single one of those senators to go on record and say whether the president has the power to seize a foreign country's oil, then we deserve what comes next. Because today it's Venezuela, tomorrow it's Colombia, and the day after that, who knows? Maybe they'll find a security threat in your backyard that justifies a little absolute resolve. The MAGA Civil War isn't about personality. It's about whether the Constitution is a suicide pact or a living document. SJRES 90 is the only thing standing between us and a permanent state of imperial expansion. It's time to stop watching the grainy footage of the capture and start watching the roll call, because that's where the real war is being lost.